Hello, everyone. This is Stephen with AI Culture. Normally, I interview other social scientists about AI, but today I'm being interviewed. A fellow anthropologist, Abby Letsinger, reached out to interview me for her podcast, Anthropuzzled, and I decided to post it here. Feel free to check out her podcast as well. Like I said, its name is AnthroPuzzled, and I'll include some links to it below. But talk about experiences working as both an anthropologist and a data scientist in the world of AI. So without further ado, let's get started.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AnthroPuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letsinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Stephen Paff. He originally studied both math and anthropology and now works as a data scientist where he leverages both to understand how people work. He also runs his own AI company called Idea Corner LLC while also traveling around the world. How are you doing today, Stephen?
Doing well. What about you?
I'm doing great as well. We are into a new year, so this is going to be super exciting. So what is it that you do and how is it important and related to anthropology?
Yeah, so I work as a data scientist, and not everyone knows what that word means. As a matter of fact, my experience is most people don't, so maybe I'll get started with that. So a data scientist builds models around data. A lot of what I do is in kind of machine learning, and I guess it's technically considered a part of AI. I don't always like the word AI to describe data science and machine learning because I think it gives people the wrong ideas. They often think more of like a Terminator movie than they do of like what we actually do in this space, but that's okay. So a lot of what I do involves trying to basically use data to understand people and understand like what people are thinking and how they're behaving and try to represent and understand that. So way back in the day, you already talked about this, but I studied math and anthropology. At the time, I wasn't sure which one I was more interested in. So I'm like, this is undergrad. I'm like, why not use this time in college just to study both? Why decide between the two? And that was like me trying to narrow my interests because I'm the type of person that's interested in like 20 things. So like two very different things was trying to get all my interests in only two majors. But like at the time, I didn't really have a concept for how they made sense together. But over time, I just started to discover what data science was. And data science is a very good mix of both. It's like effectively programming math. It's like a mix of how do you get the computer to do math, or how do you teach the computer to do math? But most data scientists focus on the technical side, but really we deal with social questions like what's going on with users? How can we model diseases in the population? At one point I worked at a hospital where those were the types of questions I have. In the private sector, it's often like, how can we understand users? These are social science questions. So it honestly, I think in terms of how to think about it, I lean much more on anthropology for that in terms of like how to approach the questions. And then the math and the programming give me tools to be able to answer them in dynamic ways, if that makes sense.
Okay. So the data that you are essentially analyzing is more of like social things rather than like, oh, here's an Excel spreadsheet of 50 bajillion numbers. Can you organize this kind of thing?
Yes, that's the case for me. Honestly, this is the case for data scientists in general. I think usually data scientists have a background in something like engineering or programming. It's becoming a thing now that there are data science programs where people study data science. But like at the time I entered the field, that was a pretty new idea to have like a university department, a data science department. But like, so like most people came from some kind of STEM field and then kind of went into data science. But at the end of the day, most data scientists actually are basically trying to solve social science problems. There are data scientists in like astronomy where their data is the stars and their, topic matter is not people. It's different. But like the vast majority of data scientists out there, like when you look at like, what is this table of data that you're talking about that they're trying to analyze? It's actually on some level data about people, like data about users, data about a population. whatever it is. And the questions that they're asking are social science questions, like what are people doing? How can we understand their actions? But data science itself is like the emphasis is framed on the technical side. It's like the person and the data and the math and the computers, but it's actually social science. It's actually, at the end of the day, they're actually trying to understand people and solve people problems.
Okay. So kind of what does your day-to-day look like? Because I know you're running your own company, the Idea Corner LLC. What's all that about?
Yeah. So that's a different day to day when I was kind of a more standard data science, because when you build a company, you have to do like everything. Like it's not a super specialized. You have to do like marketing. You have to do this. You have to do that. And then it's also complicated by the fact that I'm currently traveling the road. So that completely changes my day to day, because like my day to day is very not consistent. Because in different parts of the world, I'll have very different rhythms. But like I would say, starting my own company, it looks like a lot of what I'm doing is around designing and things like ideating and trying to come up with concepts and basically using that in kind of designing further levels in. And then after that, it's a lot on the product side. It's like, you could say it's building products and developing products and then working with people and saying, hey, what do you think about this? Would this work and this and that? As a data scientist, the day-to-day is a bit different. I would describe the day-to-day when I was a data scientist as a very interesting mix of like me in the computer programming by myself and a ton of meetings. Because you end up, especially in the past organizations, I was the first data scientist at that organization, or in some cases in that department. So like when I worked at Google, I wasn't the first data scientist in the organization. I'm not even the first 10,000th at Google, but in my area, I was the only person with like an in-depth data science or statistical or just any kind of quantitative background. So like my job was to build things was to figure out how to use this stuff to develop insights. And that was also the case when I was at smaller companies. So it was a mix of like listening to people talk about the questions they have and the problems they have and translating that and figuring out like, are these problems that we can use something like machine learning to solve? And then and kind of developing that and kind of going back and forth with that and saying, what if we do this? And they'd be like, what about this? And kind of talking with them and then sitting down at the computer and actually building the stuff, which would be like the kind of me and my computer time.
Now, was it when you were getting your math degree that you learned programming, or did you learn programming on your own?
I learned programming on my own. I did take some programming courses for the math degree, but I had already known programming by that time. There were some computer science courses that were required, but I taught myself programming when I was in high school. So, or I guess I learned my first programming language in like the summer of like 4th or 5th grade. It was sometime in elementary school. I was like at a library. I saw this. I was just like literally walking around the library bored on some summer day. I think the library had AC. Maybe that's why I was hanging out there. But like, I like saw this like thing, this like software that you could check out that was like, we'll teach you BASIC, which is a programming language for kids. And I just picked it up and I learned it. My dad was like a software engineer. So maybe it was kind of just around me at the time, but I did it by myself. And then I showed him later. I was like, look, Dad, I learned to program this. And then by high school, I was like teaching Java. So I guess I was a bit self-taught.
Is having programming knowledge kind of essential or beneficial to being a data scientist?
Well, absolutely. I would say I've talked to many people who have been like, I'm interested in becoming a data scientist. What can I do to learn it? Or how can I know if this is a good fit for me? And my first question for them is, do you know any programming languages? And if their answer is no, I tell them, learn a programming language. Maybe first learn Python. Some people will learn SQL first. That's a little baby steps. The SQL's a little weird. So it's not like good representative of other programming languages. So I'll say Python because that's the main programming language for data science. And I'm like, you can learn Python free online. Try to learn Python. If you don't like it, that's a sign that you should not become a data scientist, because a data scientist is basically a mixture of math and programming. There are data analyst jobs that aren't as heavy on the programming side. So like if that's the case for them, but they still like analyzing data, I will kind of push them in that direction. But for data science, absolutely. It's actually a good litmus test of like, do you like programming, do you like this field entirely?
Yeah, because I noticed when I had started going back to school for a data analytics and systems engineering degree. It's currently on pause, but I saw a lot of my courses did have like programming courses in it. And I thought it was more for the systems engineering side of the degree rather than the data analytics. But I guess that would make sense if you guys are working with like big amounts of data or anything like that, like being able to program anything so that would make it easier would make a lot of sense logistically.
Yeah. And for that programming would be a bit of both. I mean, obviously, it's also super useful for the systems side. And obviously, it's probably more useful for the system side. My experience with data analytics is that it can go either way. Like a lot of older data analytics is not programming based. Some data analysts are like basically only in Excel, and they might actually do some things that are programming, but it's not like programming with a capital P. It's not the standard thing people think of when you're talking about, like, it's not like me with a Python notebook, but like it's the direction that this has been like data analytics has been heading for the last like 5 or 6 years. I actually think one of the ironies is it's entirely possible if AI does more analysis that it will actually require less programming, because it might do some of that for us and basically like allow people to kind of more regularly be like, I want analysis of this, and then it develops the code to do that. But at least at the present moment, the technology is not there yet.
Were there any projects that you worked on that kind of just stuck with you after working on it, if you're allowed to talk about them? Because I know Google can be a little about sharing things.
Yeah, so I'm going to give 2 different sets of answers. So one, when I was at the hospital, I remember working at the beginning of COVID-19 I was working at a hospital system in the Bronx in New York City. So that's where I'd lived for 6 years before I started traveling the world. And there, let's just say COVID was a bit of a lot of people will talk about like some of the kind of crazy societal transitions that happened. But like working at a hospital when New York was the global epicenter of the pandemic, which would have been the spring of 2020. There was a period when it was like the main place where COVID was happening, was a very interesting experience. Like I consider this work useful. If I didn't consider it useful, I wouldn't have done it. But like at that time, there were things that were like, if I did something wrong from the perspective of analyzing data, like people would die. Like it was a very high stakes environment. That definitely stuck with me. And then at Google, I think it was the volume. I was the single person. My technical title was quantitative UX researcher at Google, which is like at Google and big tech, that's a little different to data science because they kind of have their own definitions of these words. But like, I remember my very first day, like I oversaw all networking products within cloud. And I remember on the very first day, joining that team, my supervisor basically said, there's going to be more work than you. And he said, that's not your fault. He's like, that's not your problem. That's the problem of the powers that be above me that decided to have one person fill this position, not 2, not even 6. I oversaw like 75 products and I like built the metric systems for all of them. So it was a bit of it was a lot of management. It was a lot of what's the most important thing and what's the best way to get the most bang for the buck. And I would say like almost figuring out how can I understand this space? Like from like I was technically a quantitative UX researcher. Most UX researchers might have like 4 or 5 PMs that report to them. That's the typical structure at Google. I had over 100. And like, yeah, it was just, I guess no one can see your jaw dropping. No one can hear that. I mean, but like, it was just, there was a lot of magnitude. But like, I remember on the first day, he's like, there's going to be more work than you. And he's like, that's not your problem. you get as much done as you can within the 40-hour work week, and what you don't get done, you don't get done. That's fine. And it was there could be a bit of a mentality of like, you're a bucket in the pouring rain where you're trying to pick up all the water, but there's going to be so much water coming down. You're only one bucket. You're only going to get like one chunk of it. And that's fine. But like, it was a lot of management. It was a lot of figuring out how to say no. It was also figuring out how to like do things that would work across products to get the most leverage, and in very different spaces too. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds like it also leads to extreme burnout.
It definitely can. I think because I had a supervisor that was like very upfront with, this is the technical amounts, but this is not what's on your plate. Stephen, you are the subject matter expert. You decide what you can and can't do. You figure out. And for me, that was very good. Like, I work well with a, like, here's the thing, you go figure it out kind of approach. But like, I think that's what kind of allowed me to survive. But I will say, like, at Google, I think they were kind of culturally in a bit of like a post burnout. Like, there was a very like I think a year or two ago, they had made some very big changes for people who are kind of stuck overworking. And there's a lot of emphasis on, we need to make sure work-life balance. Like, it was kind of like almost like every meeting, there's a strong emphasis on like, this is what, you say what you can do, and then everyone respects that. But yes, it was a kind of job where there's always 100 things happening. And it kind of like intellectually felt like being on Times Square, where 100 things are happening. And, when you live in New York City, you can get used to a place like Times Square. But like, a tourist is first there for the first time, they're kind of on information overload. And then over time, a New Yorker learns how to funnel and like only focus on a couple things, because otherwise they would go a little quirky. I think was kind of necessary in that environment.
Well, it's good you had a supervisor that was like that, because I have the same type of supervisor right now, which is amazing because we get so many cases, and, attorneys are also giving their cases to different attorneys, which means like another request is getting put in, that there's just so much coming in that my boss is always like, if you can help each other, help each other. Like, don't feel that like whatever's been assigned to you, that like, if you're struggling, don't just sit there and struggle with it. Like, ask someone for help. We'll split up the load if we need to. So she's very understanding of work on your work. If you don't get it done for the day, just get it done the next day. Because it was very much work-life balance of, you don't need to take your work home. Don't stay here for overtime. Like, just do your 40 hours and then have your weekend.
There you go. That's good. I'm glad you have that, because district attorneys' offices or public defenders are known for both. I guess both sides are known for burnout or like high stress, high workload environments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had times where, because I work in discovery, so I provide discovery to public defenders and private attorneys. And there's times where they'll get a new public defender, and so a lot of the other attorneys are like, here's some cases. And then that new attorney gets like 125 new cases in one day. And I'm just like, I just have to like resend this to you, but you have to actually deal with these cases. And I don't know how you keep all that straight, because I'd be overwhelmed and overstimulated and be like, I can't do this profession.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I could definitely understand that. I remember my only experience with something like that was when I was summoned for grand jury duty, of all things, which like most people don't know about that, but that's when you decide to indict. So it's not a single case like a trial, like regular jury duty, but you see like we saw like easily 80 to 100 cases over a month. And it was like, here's a new one, and we had to keep them straight. I will say that gave me a sense for the prosecution side, because we barely like interact with the defense. It's like the grand jury phase is a very like prosecution slanted phase of the criminal justice system. But yeah, that's a different conversation.
Yeah. So what kind of piqued your interest in anthropology? Because I know you said you're a kind of person who likes doing 20 different things and having to settle on like something for college. You went with math and anthropology. Why anthropology?
Yeah, so I think, as a teenager, I always had an interest in social things and like social questions, and also maybe broadly what you could say are like the questions of life. So like for that, think like philosophy, like some of the, like kind of bigger questions about thing, I guess. So I remember when I first came in as a freshman, and I was also interested in math. I think I technically said like, oh, I'm going to major in history and math. And I like started taking history courses, and around the beginning of the sophomore year, I took a intro to anthropology course, and I liked it. I also was taking philosophy courses because I was contemplating doing philosophy either instead of history or maybe instead of math, or like I was also contemplating philosophy. And between the three, I concluded that anthropology answered my questions or approached the questions in the way I liked the most. So like, I guess you could say broadly the questions of life. History definitely can answer these questions or look at these questions, but a lot of history ends up looking at some of these like kind of big picture, like, the forces of history and what's shaping kind of not like the day-to-day aspects of the questions of life, I guess you could say. Doesn't always focus on the ground perspective, though some history can. And then with philosophy, my conclusion was like both anthropology and philosophy will try to answer similar questions. But philosophy will answer it by having us read bunches of old white guys in kind of a philosophical canon, whereas anthropology puts the emphasis on talking to people in different cultures around the world and trying to answer those questions in conversation with them. And I think I like that approach better. And so that's what made me interested in anthropology.
So by obtaining an anthropology degree and learning kind of what anthropology is about, do you feel that it's kind of broadened your viewpoint and perspective on the world?
Absolutely. I mean, looking back, I would say that the math and the data science gave me skills on my resume, but anthropology was much more useful in shaping how I think and how I approach things and how I think about problems, or just think about people and think about how people work. It's answered much more of the like why, I think, more so than the math. There's still ways that math taught me some of those things, but like the math and the data science is much more of a like tool set for me to be able to do this stuff, and one that's in kind of demand job wise. But like the anthropology actually undergirds my like approaches to both life itself and my approaches to like asking questions.
Now, I've noticed a trend with anthropologists that I have talked to over the past year and a half that a few have created their own companies, like an individual like yourself. Do you feel that with an anthropology degree, it kind of helps in a way in creating a company and like trying to come up with something that will benefit humankind in a way, rather than looking at things like profit metrics, yada, 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 but more of like, what can I make that would benefit others?
I do. This is a very good point. I haven't thought about this. One quick thing I'll say at the start. It's interesting that a lot of anthropologists are starting companies. I think that's an overall trend with humanity now. It seems like a lot of people, I mean, especially since COVID, are kind of like, screw it, I'm going to start my own company. I think especially in tech, as some of the work conditions in tech are deteriorating, a lot of people are getting fed up with their employers, and starting their own company is a part of that. There's, I think, a lot of like social trends that are pushing in that direction, but it might not just be anthropologists. With anthropology, I think it's helpful. It's helpful in the way that you asked, or the way that you're thinking about like being more holistic in what the point of the organization is. I do agree with that it can definitely push in that direction. I think the other way that it's also super helpful is in actually like sitting down and thinking about what people need and what would be useful, and building that from the ground up. One thing in the startup world, and I'm thinking particularly in tech, though this can be other types of startups too, is that there are many people who have almost a solution in search of a problem, where like they'll have I want to do this, or they'll come up with this very interesting thing of what if we do this? And then they'll almost then try to find a space in which that product makes sense. Or people who will say, I think this is the solution. They experience their life of like, I have X problem. What if I build something that solves that problem? And then they might start a company that does that. And, in some cases that works just fine. But like in many cases, they discover that was their problem, or the way that they went about solving the problem, if others had it, was completely different than how the types of solutions others see. So anthropology often forces you to kind of sit down and say, what do people actually need? And what are their needs? And then what types of things do they use to solve their needs? And it focuses much more on like a ground up based approach, which could be surprisingly different from how a lot of startups work.
I do agree. A lot of individuals, not just anthropologists, are starting startups because sometimes working conditions are not great. I think a lot of people leave jobs that they love because of higher up management. So getting into a company that has good management is sometimes rare. So if you start your own company, I feel like some of those individuals are more likely to be like, I know what it's like to be treated like crap. I'm not going to treat my employees like that. So I'm going to create a space in which, I'm going to be solving X problem or whatever, while also providing an opportunity for others to engage in this space as well.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I do think anthropology actually helps build that more from the ground up too, as opposed to people building stuff for themselves.
Also, when you say bottom up, what does that mean exactly?
So from bottom up, I guess top down would be more of a like, I have this insight and I want to build the insight and figure out, I have this theory and I'm going to try to apply it. The really good example of bottom up is something like ethnography, where it's like, I want to understand this space. So what do? I go there, whatever that means, however it means to be in that space. And I go observe and I kind of figure out what there is to be learned in that space. And I build my insights and I build my ideas from being there. And I learn that way. Whereas a top down is much more of a, here's my question. I'm going to go evaluate my question. And what I was saying is that a lot of traditional statistics by that measure is very top down. It's like you build the method and then you kind of apply the method to that data. Whereas a lot of machine learning is much more bottom up. It's much more, here's the data. How can we figure out what kind of model makes sense of this and build the model by iterating with the data? Just like with ethnography, you're building the insight by hanging out with the people, talking with them, understanding their world and their perspective, and then you're building it in conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like bottom up is like make observations and then ask questions based on observations, whereas top down is ask your questions and then try and make observations that will answer your questions.
Yes. And I think anthropology as a discipline is very much on the vanguard of bottom up. It's one of the big ones. It's like, no, bottom up is where things are at. We should do bottom up research. But of course, it does bottom up in a very qualitative way. And historically, what happened is the people who did top down tended to go in more of a statistical direction. So they tended to do more quantitative. So a quantitative qualitative debates kind of like got divided between bottom up and top down. That in social science, the top down analysis tended to be quantitative and the bottom up alternatives tended to be qualitative. As a mathematician, I don't think math can be just as bottom up, but the forms of it that developed to understand people were done by people who are very top down in their thinking. They developed top down forms of math to understand people. Whereas I think machine learning, there's a promise to build more bottom up ways of understanding people quantitatively, in addition to the qualitative ways that anthropology has been one of the major disciplines developing, like ethnography.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, if someone was looking to go into being a data scientist, what kind of salary might they be looking at for that career field?
Yeah, this is a good question. I looked this up because it does vary and we're seeing inflation and all this stuff. So it seems like the current mean in the US is somewhere around 110 to 130,000 a year, it seems to be. But like that's at least especially for entry level, because it does vary throughout the first entry level versus 1 to 3 years versus 4 to 6 years, and so on. I'm a little bit funky because I live in New York City where like the cost of things is just different. Salaries are just different. But like entry level is typically around the first half of 100,000, which might be a bit higher salary than some other kind of anthropology. Like if you're in a nonprofit, you might be paid lower. You're working for the government as a data scientist, you might even be paid more because they kind of have higher salaries. But like, so it does vary pretty widely.
Yeah, and I know it varies widely because of where you live, because someone who works in like New York City might not have as high of a cost of living if they live in like Kansas City or something like that. So they have to adjust the salary range based on that. But it also depends on the company, whether you're working for, a smaller company or if you're working for a big company like Google, the pay is also going to widely vary. So I think it's important for students when they're looking for jobs to whatever state they're looking in is like looking for the average of what are employers offering across the board for your state and not trying to compare to what does someone in California make to someone in Florida make. That's not really a good comparison.
I absolutely agree. We in New York also like Silicon Valley and San Francisco, the Bay Area tend to really skew the data. And also I did say the average, by which I meant mean. So most data when you look online will tell you the average, but you should really, for salary, look at the median. The median does a little better with the exact thing you're talking about of different costs of living in different places. It doesn't account for that. It isn't as good with that, but it does deal with the fact that like you're going to have some people that can be paid like 500,000 and that's just going to mess up with, or more than that, like very high amounts. And it just completely skews the average. That takes me back to when I used to teach statistics, because I used to have to teach about that and explain how, averages just don't work super well when it comes to salaries. Even though that average is still what like most, if you look online, most reports will tell you the average, even though it's like it's not the good one for salaries specifically.
Okay. Yeah, that takes me back to like, I think it was statistics, but it's like that one little graph/chart where you have like your little box and like the middle line is like the median. And then you have the two lines that go out and those are like the outliers, like the smallest number and the largest number so that they're not included in the like average box. I don't remember what it's called. Like my brain says Gantt chart, but that don't sound right.
It was not the Gantt chart. I think you're describing a box and whisker. Gantt charts are for like project management, totally different thing. They're also helpful, but they're not statistical at all. But yes, this is exactly what I was thinking about. I remember teaching these. Maybe a student, if your program requires a statistics class, maybe you remember this too. I remember teaching it. It's the one disadvantage of a podcast is I can't just be like, here's one right here, but feel free to look them up. Even like a box and whisker chart could be interesting to look up if anyone just Googles it real quick.
Yeah. Now, do you feel that having a higher education degree, like a master's or a PhD, is required or essential for being a data scientist?
Well, it's actually a very good question. It's a surprisingly complicated question because it might be changing. So when I became a data scientist, it was not by any stretch. And as a matter of fact, it was pretty much expected that like you wouldn't even have a degree in data science. But now that's becoming more common. You have to remember when I first started, like I think I became a data scientist in like the first year that Stanford created their data science program, which I believe was the first data science program. And then when it was like, oh, Stanford's doing it, then other universities across the US copied. I might be wrong about that chronology. Like anyone feel free to like Google that and fact check it. That's my memory, but that might not be like, historically accurate. I need to double check the details. But anyway, so like now, but like, especially at that time. So for a while, there were more demand for data scientists than data scientists. So like if all you basically had to do was demonstrate the skills, but also because pretty much no one had a degree in it, like it was more proforial based. It was more like, can you show that you can do the, like machine learning and other stuff? I think that might be more of the adolescence of the discipline. As the discipline matures, we're getting more and more people who just study data science, and, good for them. And that might push in the direction it's becoming a bit more specialized. It's becoming a bit more focused. Also in AI, it's becoming a bit more like a lot of the things that take a lot of time just are becoming a lot quicker. So what data scientists actually do are a bit more like edge case activities. Whereas, for a while we had to spend a lot of time doing like the more standard things that you can just like ask an equivalent of a ChatGPT to just do. But like, I think in that you might see it become more specialized, but I still don't think that means you need a graduate degree. I think it's more that you need to demonstrate the skill set. I think we're still in a space where there's more demand for data scientists than data scientists, even though more people are coming into the field. But it's more like, can you demonstrate the technical skills? And it's not necessary to have an advanced degree to do it. As a matter of fact, for people who are just entering, so I talk to a lot of anthropologists who will reach out to me saying, I'm thinking about becoming a data scientist. Can I get your advice on whether to do that? Because I'm one of the few people who are both. So they would naturally reach out to me. And for people who are considering the field, I would strongly not recommend they go get a master's. I would recommend they do something like learn programming, see if they like it, start doing data science. And then if after they kind of have their first job or as they're doing it and they conclude this is something I like, then go spend the 10,000, thousands upon thousands of dollars to go study it in a graduate degree. I don't, because, a lot of people on the other end, go study data science and they go take out loans or go spend a lot of money to get a master's degree in it, basically only to discover in those 2 years that they don't like it. So I would recommend entering in a lower stakes way to kind of test the waters. And then if you conclude like, oh, I have been doing this for a while, I do like it, then by all means, go get an advanced degree.
Do you have any advice for the people who do go get their advanced degree, like with you having gone through grad school yourself?
Yeah, and my grad school was a little bit funky because of all things, I got it in anthropology. No, that's for this podcast, that's not weird at all. But in the data science community, that would be weird. But I got it in kind of like a mix. So with the anthropology department, though, I took like a bunch of data science classes too. So I kind of combined the two. I really, in effect, like I did in undergrad, but in undergrad, you can do a double major, whereas I kind of crafted my own like specialty in data science in the grad school program because no one else was in the anthropology department was interested in it in that way. But like, I would say the single best decision I made was I went with a program. I basically, and I don't think I would have gone without this, but I went with a program that I worked and they paid for my master's. Basically, it was a deal with the company in the local areas and I worked for them for like 20 hours a week and then they paid for my master's. And the con of that is that it meant I was a super busy person because I was in effect working 2 part-time jobs while I was a full-time student because I was also working as a consultant at that time. And so like I easily worked like 80, 90 hour weeks. And I honestly, part of me looking back is like, I don't know how I did it. Like I did, but it also meant that I had no debt. So like, honestly, I think that was worth it, even though that's like quite the thing to suggest because it was kind of insane. It could be very busy, but I think it was absolutely worth it.
Yeah, that's been a piece of advice that a lot of individuals have offered as well is, if you can find a funded program, go with the funded program because higher education costs are unnecessarily so high that it makes it inaccessible to a lot of students. Now, not all jobs require a master's degree or a PhD, but for those that do and are like, yep, this is the path I want, sometimes they go into a crap ton of debt for it. And then at that point, you can't even enjoy your degree because your only thought is, I have to pay off all of this debt. So finding a fully funded program, it's hard, but it's possible. They're out there. You just have to look really hard for them and find some connections.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add to this is I think an important difference between undergrad and grad school is that undergrad at least in the US, completely different in other parts of the world, but at least in the US, it's a bit of a time to find yourself. And, you can do what I did and major in two very different things, or do what I only switched my major once, but like I have friends that switched their major like 6 times, and this is all fine. It's undergrad. Like you can do that, at least in a liberal arts college. But like grad school is built different. It's much more, it's like the school version of like a sniper rifle. It's much more narrow. And I think it's built much more for over the years. This is what I've learned I enjoy. And I'm going to go really study the fine tunes of it to be able to do it at a more advanced level. So, some people will have the like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, so I'm going to go to, so I'll go to grad school kind of approach. And, often, like school is what they know. So there's maybe a bit of comfort in that. But unfortunately for how grad school actually is, it's like the worst idea. Like that actually works well in undergrad. You can find yourself in undergrad. It's built for that and to explore different options. Whereas I think grad school is much more built for, this is what I want to do, whether you want to do it in the professional world or the academic world. I really like data science, or I really like this form of medicine, like whatever, or law, or whatever it is. And so I'm going to go take my ability to do it to the next level. So I would say try to find a job in the world and use that to discover what you want to do. When you're a little older, you'll know like, this is what I actually want to do. And then you can go to grad school for it. I think that's the much better approach, even if it's a lot more daunting to, have to leave the comfort of a school environment. And even if the job prospects in the quote unquote real world look bleak, it's still the better option in the long run.
Exactly. Now, before we get to our final 4 questions, is there anything we haven't discussed today that you'd still like the listeners to know about?
Yeah, I guess. So one thing I would say, so a common thing when on the anthropology side with math, a lot of people that I've talked to who study anthropology hate math. Their primary experience is with math. I've had bad experiences with it in high school and elementary school. And then I had to take this stupid stats course for my, as the ones, math course they had to take or something. And a lot of people have bad experiences with math, and it's really sad. And it's one thing, like before I became a data scientist, I taught high school math, and I remember like looking at a lot of the literature, including the like anthropologists and sociologists of education talk about like math teaching. And I think there's many problems, like many people just have like a bad teacher and stuff like this. But like in my experience, many people learn in Western society in particular, they learn that math is something that they can't do. And there's actually a lot of literature that talks about this. So like there was a study as one example that talked about how with elementary school kids, they're analyzing how parents helped their kids with their homework. And what they basically said was when the kids struggled with reading, this is like maybe first or second graders, the parents would like sit with them and like work with them until they became better at reading. Whereas when the kids struggled at math, the parents would often implicitly have this kind of attitude of, well, they just must not be good at math. Math must not be their thing. And this can be societally learned for math and related skills like programming and this and that, where people learn, I just can't do it. Unfortunately, if you think you can't do it, that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Math is like any skill. If you work on it, you will get better. Like it's the same with piano to art to, to the various skills involved with anthropology. The practice is how you get better. And if this is something you're interested in, you can learn math. But if this kind of implied social narrative that there are people who are quote unquote math people, this is kind of ingrained in aspects of how our society works, both implicitly and explicitly. And it's just wrong. And it's bad. It's bad on many levels. Many people learn they can't do math. This can impact people who are impact women more than men. Women are much more likely to internalize this. Same with people of color are much more likely to be given this type of message that they just can't learn math. And it's a real frustration for how that can impact people. So if you are interested, do it. If you need to talk about it, a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn of like trying to learn data science. I'm struggling about this. Can you help? Or how can I get started if they're in this stage where they, wherever they're at in that process. But like on the math side in particular and with programming, if you want to do it, you can do it. Don't let some idea that like you're just not good at it get in the way.
Everybody has different learning methods when it comes to math. And I think finding a teacher that recognizes that and that like they're okay teaching different methods to find how to do math is super important.
You're exactly right. A good teacher is helpful. And then also as we become adults, we start to have more tools to be able to craft the learning environment that we ourselves need. So sometimes people, not everyone learns well independently, but sometimes people will be like, this is how I learn. So I'm going to teach myself it in this way. You start to get more tools for that too.
But anyways, so our final 4 questions. The first one is, what is the best piece of advice you'd offer to someone who is interested in getting in the fields that you have worked in?
Yeah, I do feel like this one, I've kind of incorporated some of them in some of my major pieces of advice. And for this podcast, I've been focusing on people with an anthropology or some other social science background and advice from them, because I've talked to a lot of people from different backgrounds who are learning data science. Like someone from a computer science or math background, I would give a bit of the different sets of advice because in my experience, they usually are coming from a different space. Anyways, I guess just remember, like, you can do it. One thing with learning programming and then also other things like data science, especially if you're going to learn it on your own, it is frustrating. So like if you are learning programming and you're like, why the heck? I keep typing it and it either just gives me an error and I don't know why. And then you find out it's something dumb like your comma was in the wrong place or something. Because programming languages are very picky, but like if as you're learning programming and you kind of want to like throw the computer out the window, that's fine. That doesn't mean you're bad at it. I think a lot of people that are predisposed to think I'm not good at it, they might try and then they get to this stage and they're like, especially if they're learning it online or like learning it by themselves, it's fine to talk to someone who knows the stuff. You also at first don't have the language. So like now if I encounter something, I can like Google the string concatenation, whatever, and like figure out my problem because I know the language to be able to look it up. But it's a little like a doctor, like my foot's in pain, but I don't know even how to discover what the problem is because I don't know the medical jargon to be able to like actually look up the issue. It's kind of similar with learning programming. And there's people who get discouraged. Like if you encounter that, that's not you being a failure. That's not like you being awful at this. That is just something everyone encounters. It's a problem with learning this skill set. It's not you. Usually, like if you learn it in a classroom, like you can see other people struggling and kind of be in a bit of a community and understand like it's not me, but people who learn it themselves, especially those from like a social science background who might be already have an experience of I can't do math or I can't do programming. This stuff already frustrates me. They're much more likely in my experience to think I just can't do it when they don't realize that like literally everyone has that frustration and it is not a marker. It says nothing about them as a person. The other thing, I kind of already said this before, but if you can explore ways to kind of inch in to explore whether you like the activity before spending like thousands of dollars on either like a master's degree or even like a boot camp that can cost like $10,000. That's cheaper than a master's degree, but like that's still a good chunk of money. Or even like there are ways to do it. There's a lot of resources for free. Not everyone learns well by themselves, but like it can be good to kind of test the waters before you invest money. And when there's a lot of resources online, that kind of helps you evaluate, is this an activity I actually like? Because otherwise people will study it and then just realize, I don't actually like this. Some people, this might not be the stereotypical anthropologist. This might be a different crowd, but some people, because it's a well-paid position, it's kind of like lawyers. Like, everyone flocks to the law or doctors because they're well-paid. That can happen within data science. And so they're like, I want that salary, so I'm going to do it. And then they begin to study it and then they realize they don't like it at all. The final thing, on my website or on my blog, I do specifically have an article about how to decide what of the many ways of learning data science is the best fit for you, and like what's the trade-offs, like what are the pros and cons of grad school, what are the pros and cons of just learning on your own, what are the pros and cons of a more intensive boot camp, what are the pros and cons of like, the Coursera or their various equivalents now of like, roughly $30 program that will teach you online. So like a lower stakes online training, and kind of walk through some of those. That kind of thing can also be helpful to think about too. If you're like, I want to learn to become a data scientist, is think through that. But I always say start cheap, start free, and then slowly add the more expensive options if you're increasingly concluding this is something I like, and I need that to be able to take my ability to do this to the next level.
Okay, awesome. Now, are there any changes you'd like to see in the industry?
Yeah, so the one change I would like to see that might actually be happening is I would like to see the stuff get built so that more regular people can interact with data on their own. For a while, partially because like you needed to program a bunch to be able to do anything. Like it was almost like a wizard's effect. And by that, I mean like magic. Actually, a lot of anthropologists who study data science and machine learning will say it's just like a magic community where like you need help from the shaman, or you need whatever in the spiritual world to do something with the demons, or, you're sick or someone's giving you bad magic, whatever it is, you have to go to a specialist. You have to go to the shamans because they're the ones that like actually know how to like interact with that world. Data science can be a little like that, where there can be, at least when I first joined, there could be a bit of a like regular people needed to go find a data scientist to be able to like answer some of their basic questions about the data, or data analysts. And now it's becoming a bit more accessible for people to play. And I think that's overall a good thing. It's good because both people can on some level answer some of their own questions, but more importantly, the barrier of entry is easier, which means developing data skills and data literacy is easier to do because it's easier to play. That's the hope. There are cons to that too, but like I think that's the promise. But in terms of other changes, I wish one other change that I think is also happening is many data science programs are starting to see how important like social science thinking is within data science. So there's many, like the Stanford program, like the professor, the head of the data science department there would talk a lot. Like he made sure, I think he even taught the class personally, but like built a class that was basically like on like how to develop social science skills and how to think about the complexities of some of the questions on like a social science side, because a lot of data science is typically focused on the technical side, not actually thinking about like what I said at the beginning, that these are really social science problems and people are ambiguous, people are complicated. I think that's impacting like on the academic side of data science. Like if you're going to get an undergrad or grad degree, that's becoming a bit more common that they also want to train you in social science. But the actual culture of data science in the professional environment is still, much more of an emphasis on like the math and the programming of how to build interesting models, not how to solve complicated and ambiguous problems and how to understand people, or how to kind of work within this nebulous space that is people, because we're notoriously complicated and inconsistent and hard to predict.
Mm-hmm. Now, what did you absolutely love about your job working as a data scientist, or just the industry in general?
Yeah, I think one thing that really attracted me to data science and machine learning was that I saw how machine learning could be used to do a lot of rigorous ground up like modeling or quantitative analysis. So let me take a step back there. So, we were talking a little bit about statistics, but like, and I used to teach statistics. I published multiple papers in statistics. One critique I have of that field, especially intro level statistics, more advanced, like people who are getting their PhD statistics, that's totally different. But the intro level statistics that like people learn in their, intro to statistics course that they have to take for their major, for example, is a very top-down form of analysis. It's a very, here are some theoretical models for how data works. We're going to assume that they meet that data and then and basically build insights off of that. And things like even like a hypothesis test on a fundamental level works in that way. What I saw with machine learning is that the approach was flipped, or at least could be flipped. There still are top-down ways of doing machine learning too, but like it was much more of a, we're going to build the model based off of the data, and we're going to build it or have the computer build it from the ground up based off of the intricacies of what the data is doing. And I really like that. I thought it much more coincided with the bottom-up forms of thinking that the anthropology fostered. So like the anthropologist in me would get kind of frustrated with a lot of the traditional statistics. You know, in anthropology, the solution is to the bottom up is pretty much exclusively qualitative. And, you know, that's important, that those types of analysis are helpful. But I saw like, here's some promise for doing quantitative analysis that was bottom up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I guess my final question for you is, where can listeners learn more about you or what you do?
Yeah, very good question. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, like I said, I have talked to a lot of people who are in various social sciences, anthropology included, that are trying to learn or interested at least thinking about data science. So if you're in that kind of world, you can reach out to me for that. LinkedIn is by far the best. But if you want to learn more about some of the thoughts, including that a little more details on the thing I just said at the end about the bottom up and how to maybe build quantitative forms of bottom up thinking, my website would be the best for that. And that's ethnodata.com. I had to put a hyphen in there because someone else had the other one. So it's ethno-data.com. And then I do have a number of other like websites on different things. Like I have a YouTube channel and a podcast and all that stuff, but those kind of center on a different side of things. So these are the two best ones for like understanding data science and kind of that aspect of my world. But the other stuff you can also find on LinkedIn. One's crackdoor.com. The YouTube channel one is called Democracy Demythologized, and the other one is The Curious Life. But all of those would be on my LinkedIn. So maybe the LinkedIn is the best like first place to go. It's kind of where everything else you can find.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and chatting with me about data science and providing another route for anthropology students to use their careers and to use their anthropology degrees to make a career out of it. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad you're doing this podcast, and I guess I wish you the best.
All right. Well, you have a fantastic rest of your day.
All right, you too.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of AnthroPuzzled. This show was produced by me and distributed in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, L. Akers for the incredible logo design, and to AnthroPuzzled's intern, Fiona, for the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letsinger@anthropuzzled.com or as AnthroPuzzled on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time.